Every human being who has ever lived has had to solve the same problem. Several times a day, every day, for their entire life. The people who built the pyramids had to solve it and then go back to work. Every Roman senator, every medieval king, every single one of your ancestors, without exception, going back 300,000 years. And almost none of them use paper. Toilet paper doesn't reach ordinary people in the West until somewhere around the 1800s. So for roughly 99.9% of human history, people had to work something else out. And what they came up with is stranger than you'd think. But the strange part isn't what they used. It's what it did to them. Start in ancient Greece. The Greeks used something called pessoi, small ceramic discs, oval or round, somewhere between 3 and 10 centimeters across, roughly the size of the palm of your hand. Some were made for the purpose, plenty weren't. A lot of the pessoi archaeologists have recovered are just broken pieces of pottery, with the sharp edges worn smooth. And here's where it gets very Greek indeed. In Athens, when citizens wanted someone exiled from the city, they voted by scratching that person's name onto a shard of pottery. The shard was called an os estrakon. It is where we get the word os estrasize. And some of the pessoi that have been found are os estraka, which means there was a real, documented, archaeologically attested practice of writing the name of a man you hated onto a piece of pottery, and then using it for this. That was published in the British Medical Journal in 2012. It may be the pettiest thing our species has ever done, and we have the evidence for it. Now Rome. The Romans had a thing called a turresso aureum, a natural sea sponge fixed to the end of a wooden stick. It lived in the public latrine. You used it, then you rinsed it in a channel of running water that ran along the floor in front of the seats or in a bucket of salt water or vinegar. And then you put it back for the next person. Now I want to be honest about this one because it gets repeated everywhere and the archaeology is genuinely less certain than the internet suggests. Anne Olga Kolosky os Estro, who wrote the standard academic book on Roman sanitation, is careful about it. There is a real argument that the sponge was for cleaning the latrine itself rather than the people using it. But even the cautious version of this is that a Roman public toilet contained one shared object and a great many people. And that brings us to the part people find harder than the sponge. Roman public latrines were big, 20 seats, 40, in some cases more than 50. Stone benches running around the walls of a single large room, with keyhole-shaped openings cut into them at regular intervals. And between those openings there was nothing. No partitions, no doors, no screens, no dividers of any kind. You sat down shoulder to shoulder with complete strangers, facing more strangers across the room, and you had a conversation. Latrines were social. People did business in them. So when you feel that particular flavor of horror right now, notice what it actually is. Privacy in a toilet is not an ancient human instinct. It is a recent invention, and a local one. Now here is the one that stops being funny. Shwenquanja, a relay station on the Silk Road in the desert of western China, in use from about 111 BC. It was essentially a service station. Travelers stopped, rested, changed horses, and used the latrine. And in that latrine, archaeologists found personal hygiene sticks, wooden sticks with cloth wrapped around one end. 2,000 years later, there were still parasite eggs on the cloth. They identified several species, and one of them was Chinese liver fluke. That parasite needs marshland to complete its life cycle. The nearest place it could possibly have come from was over 1,000 miles away. Which means somebody carried it there, inside their body, along the trade route. That is the earliest hard physical evidence we have that the Silk Road moved disease as well as silk. And we found it on a stick. Meanwhile, China had already solved the actual problem. Toilet paper shows up in Chinese records by the 6th century AD. That is roughly 1,000 years before anything like it reaches Europe. There is a scholar called Jan Jertway, writing in 589, and he says he will not use paper for this purpose if it has the words of the sages written on it. Think about what that sentence implies. He is not inventing the idea, he is setting a limit on a practice that is already completely normal. People were absolutely using paper that had writing on it, and he would rather they stopped using the good stuff. By the Ming Dynasty, the imperial court is manufacturing perfumed paper sheets in bulk, specifically for the emperor's family, in quantities recorded in the tens of thousands. And at the same time in Europe, the answer is moss, or leaves, or wool, or hay. Later in America, corn cobs. The solution existed for 1,000 years. It just did not travel. None of this is folklore. The Greek pottery was published in the British Medical Journal. The Roman archaeology comes from Anne Olga Koloski Ostro, whose book is the standard text on the subject. The Silk Road sticks were published in the Journal of Archaeological Science by a team from Cambridge. People have taken this seriously for a long time, and there is a good reason for it. Latrines are one of the best records we have of how people actually lived. Nobody performs in a toilet. Nobody curates it for posterity. It is the least edited evidence a civilization leaves behind. Okay, now the part that turns this into a different video. Rome had everything. Aqueducts bringing fresh water into the city, public baths, flushing latrines with running water underneath them, a sewer system, the Cloaca Maxima, parts of which are still in use today. By an enormous margin, the most sophisticated sanitation infrastructure in the ancient world. Nothing in Europe would match it again for well over 1,000 years. So intestinal parasites should have collapsed under Roman rule. They went up. A Cambridge researcher called Piers Mitchell went through the parasite evidence from before, during, and after the Romans. Whipworm, roundworm, dysentery. All of them appear more often in the Roman period, not less. And the reasons are grim and completely logical. Human waste was collected out of the cities and spread on farmland as fertilizer, which puts the parasite eggs directly back onto the food. The famous public baths were warm, they were shared by very large numbers of people, and the water was changed rarely. And then there is the sponge. They built magnificent plumbing without germ theory, which meant they became extremely efficient at moving waste around and never once broke the chain. So the funny list of things people wiped with is a distraction. Wiping was never the hard part. The hard part was where it went afterwards, and that took us another 1,800 years to actually understand. And here is the thing almost nobody mentions. Most of the world still does not use paper. Across most of Asia, across the Middle East, across a good part of Southern Europe, the answer is water. It always has been. And water is better, cleaner, gentler, less waste. Anyone who has used both will tell you the same thing. Paper arrives in the West commercially in 1857, when a man called Joseph Guite starts selling packaged sheets in New York. Rolls turn up around 1890. And here is my favorite detail in the entire story. Well into the 20th century, toilet paper was still being advertised as splinter-free. That was a selling point. Somebody put it on the packaging, which tells you precisely how good the previous version had been. So the thing you picture when you think of a solved problem is a local, recent, industrially manufactured minority habit. It is not the end of the story. It is just the bit we happen to be standing in. Every single person in every one of those civilizations thought their version was the normal one. The Greek reaching for a piece of broken pottery with somebody's name scratched on it, the Roman on a stone bench with 40 strangers and no walls, the Ming official with a perfumed sheet. None of them believed they were living through a strange chapter. They thought they were living at the end of the story. So did everybody who came before them. So do we. If you got something out of that, drop a like. It genuinely helps this channel more than you'd think. Subscribe if you want one strange question answered every week, and there's another one on screen right now. See you in the next one.